Hello. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Good morning from San Francisco. I know a lot of you guys are probably further in your day, so thanks for taking some time to hang out with me and learn more about GitHub for designers. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share. I'm going to go through like a quick talk, and then I'm going to actually do a live demo of sort of my workflow and how I work with GitHub every day. So hello, Internet. It's another wonderful day on the Internet. If anyone wants to shout at me at any time, I can pretty much be found anywhere on the Internet using this handle. So like Yasmina said, I'm a designer. That's a little vague these days, I think. I kind of struggle with giving people a straight answer when they ask me what I do. I work on a lot of different things. It's common at companies to have different teams for each of these aspects of design, and that's UI, UX, more of the implementation side, like front end with CSS and HTML, and then, more visual and graphic designers. But myself and all of our other designers at GitHub, we kind of do all of these things. So I like to kind of go with the thing, mostly I make stuff. And I love building things. It's why I got into the Internet. I started designing things because I loved the way web applications worked, and I consumed them so much that I thought, hey, I could probably do this. So I work for a company called GitHub, and if you're not familiar with what GitHub does, we mostly build developer tools, and we also host code. So a lot of my talk today is going to be kind of themed around this idea, and it's building software better together. This is if you hit the GitHub homepage right now and you're not signed in, you'll see this. It's kind of like our motto and what we want GitHub to do for companies and also just teams building projects. So a couple of weeks ago, I was browsing, Hacker News, and as one does, and I ran into this conversation happening with sort of the whole designer versus developer, like how we work differently, how we're kind of perceived by, each other's communities. And so this kind of sparked a discussion here at GitHub, and it's, developers are more open, contribute code, and discuss about bettering each other, while designers seem secretive, ego-filled, and seeking pointless exclusivity. And if you're a designer, you probably hate being seen this way. This isn't really, how every designer is, but I think that a lot of the perception around this has to do with the tools we use and sort of our process. We do sort of have a closed process, and I know every designer sort of has this idea of, well, what's my secret sauce? Like, what do I have that, other designers don't have? And I think it can be a little scary to think about working more out in the open the way developers do. One of my coworkers, Cal Meese, our director of design at GitHub, said something really smart when he found this quote on the Internet. He said, at the end of the day, we're all making software. We're all engineers. Even though we're working in different tools, be it Photoshop, Illustrator, Fireworks, maybe not too much longer for Fireworks actually, but, code, working on GitHub, working in different IDEs, at the end of the day, we're all trying to build something great together. So back to our quote is, everything that we do at GitHub and every feature that we build is about letting teams work better together. And it's not just developers. It's not just designers. We want to reach other people too and allow everyone to build software better together. So what this means is we kind of want to find the spot in the middle where, all of us so when designers typically work in Photoshop, I don't, but I know a lot of people do and are really comfortable there. And so it's okay, where do we intersect with developers, our counterparts? Where do we work together with them to start discussions and to kind of talk about, the direction of our project we're taking? So at GitHub, we have 162 GitHubbers, and over 50% of those Hubbers are remote. So it makes it a little hard to jump in a room and do whiteboarding or do, storyboarding. We don't really have that opportunity, even though we do come together, once or twice a year to talk about a specific project we're working on. We really don't have that, face-to-face contact every day. And so for us, being able to work distributedly and being able to work remotely is really important. And I think a lot of the tools we build reflect that. So we kind of have to meet somewhere in the middle. If I'm working with typically this team size at GitHub can be anywhere from like 2 or like on GitHub.com, there's probably close to like 90 developers and designers working on that. And so the team size can vary, but no matter what, a lot of us are remote, and we need to kind of connect with each other somewhere and have the discussions that would normally take place in a meeting or, you know, a whiteboarding session. So for us, that middle ground is GitHub. We send all of our work up to the cloud to GitHub, and that's where all of our conversations take place. That's where we do code reviews, design reviews, and that's where we typically just kind of move, we build features, and it's sort of on GitHub for GitHub. I know it's very meta. So like I said, we meet somewhere in the middle, and I think that's different for everybody. I think dictating what designers use as a design tool is really cruel. I tell designers, do whatever makes you feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable working in Photoshop, work in Photoshop. Work in Sketch. Work wherever you feel strong and wherever you feel confident in your tool set. And I think even for developers, I mean, developers work in different, you know, code editors all the time. You know, there's always like a fight between, oh, Vim's better than Sublime Text, et cetera. And obviously designers also have those things, but it's definitely more common for designers to work just, you know, in the Creative Suite and Adobe's products. But it doesn't really, I'm not going to focus on, you know, what you work on design-wise or what tools you work in, but I'm going to focus on how we can work better with other people outside of those tools. So locally, I work in a set of tools that is, I guess, kind of unique for designers, and I call them my weapons of mass creation. And that's actually a conference put on by a wonderful group of people, but I thought it was such a great idea that I wanted to steal the name. And so these are my tools. Like, this is what I work in every day. I work in a code editor, preferably like Sublime Text or TextMe, and I use the terminal to connect sort of like with my other world, which is, you know, GitHub and pushing code. So this is one of my favorite quotes by a really great designer named Megan Fisher, and it's about her process and mine as well, which is like mocking up in markup. And, you know, this quote is, a website's design should start where it's going to live. I really try to model my own process off of this. So, you know, if I'm building a web application, I probably want to start in the browser. And so that's where I ideally work. So, you know, I work in Terminal, Code Editor, and then I use like a browser to see my changes. So I design mostly in HTML and CSS. My story is a little interesting. I always, you know, really loved to design, but I actually learned to code before I learned to be, or before I became a decent designer. I really wanted to implement the things that I had in my head. I had all these ideas for, like, you know, marketing sites and, you know, little small side projects that I wanted to do, but I really couldn't make them, you know, I couldn't bring them to life without learning HTML and CSS. Even though using these are really only about creating static websites, for me, it was about putting my ideas somewhere where they could live and somewhere where other people can see them. So I work primarily in HTML and CSS. And I don't necessarily start there. I think that there is a lot of value in picking a direction, and the way that I do that is I start with sketching. So I just take a piece of paper, and even if it's about like just writing, you know, drawing squares on a page to see where I'm going to float elements, I think it's really valuable to, you know, have kind of like a plan of attack in your head. So I'm pretty lucky. Working in code allows me to be as close to a developer's process as possible, right? I'm basically a front-end developer. And so I think it's really easy for me maybe to use GitHub, but I think that there's a lot of ways that other people can use GitHub who maybe aren't as familiar with code. So if you are or you're not familiar with code, one of the questions is, okay, like, how do I take this work that I'm doing locally? Like, if I'm doing it on my code editor, if I'm, you know, creating assets in Photoshop, like, how do I get that on GitHub where, you know, the developers that I work with, where their projects live and where maybe, you know, our app lives? The key part in this is Git. So I'm going to introduce Git a little bit and tell you why version control is really, really awesome. So if you're not familiar with Git, it's distributed version control, and what that means is it's sort of like, you know how in Microsoft Word, when you used to type up like school documents or something, you would save versions by like saying, you know, the title of the document, and then like V1, V2, V3. Well, Git sort of does that for you, but it does that with your code, and it gives you, like, you know, exactly where you save that file at that specific time. So there's two really important commands that, for a designer, if you're just kind of like pushing up design or assets, really the two most important are git push and git pull, and that's how you push things to GitHub or to wherever you're hosting your code, and it's how you get things back down. So it's how you pull down changes that maybe someone else on your team was working on. So a lot of people don't think of it this way, but I think of version control as a really, really awesome design tool. And I'm going to kind of elaborate on that a little bit and tell you why I think you should really incorporate version control into your process. So one reason is assets. So I recently talked to a developer at Square, and she was telling me how even though her non-technical, at Square they're very divided. Like I was saying, they're very like, they have UI designers and then they have visual designers, and those designers don't usually implement. Although a few of them do, it's not totally the norm. But they have been teaching their designers to use GitHub to host their assets. And so what that means is they have to, if you update like, a PNG or something for like a background swatch, they're actually teaching their designers to put that in the site instead of just, dropping it into Dropbox and expecting a developer to do it. They're actually teaching their designers to be more a part of their process. So I think Git in general or anything highly technical can seem really, really intimidating. Specifically with the command line, which is the terminal that I showed you guys a little bit ago, it can seem really, really intimidating. I mean, it kind of looks like the movie Hackers or something. There's just like green code, like, scrolling down your screen, and it can be really intimidating if you don't know exactly what you're doing or you're not comfortable in the terminal. So GitHub has done a lot of awesome things to mitigate that for designers and for people who are just not as technical in general. And one of the things is we've created native apps that provide a GUI or an interface that you can use to, use those main basic commands like push and pull. You can grab those changes without having to go into terminal and do it manually. So this is a picture of GitHub for Mac. And this is a really awesome tool for designers to use because it's something that we understand, right? It's an interface. It's really simple. The language is really simple. You don't have to know any like secret like codes or commands. It's pretty straightforward, and everything basically has a button, right? We love buttons as designers. So one thing that I really love about the GitHub for Mac app is this sync button. It's really, really simple, and it's the commands I was talking about earlier, just push and pull, which are really basic. Sync basically does that for you, and that's really awesome for a designer. You can just hit one button, and you don't have to worry about, oh, did I pull this the right way? Did I push this the right way? If you need an error, the GitHub Mac app will walk you through it, which is really awesome for people who aren't as technical. We also have a Windows app, which is really awesome. This is new in the last year. A couple of our developers got together and built it out, and it's really great. It demonstrates the Metro UI. It's very very Windowsy, but it's awesome. It has the same kind of action type interface that is really easy for designers to understand, or really just non-technical people in general. So I'm going to add one more command to kind of like the repertoire of what a designer should know when working in Git, and that's commits. And commits are what make, for me anyways, like Git such a valuable part of my process. So commit data is really, really interesting. Commit history, every time you make a commit in your terminal or in the Mac app or Windows app, basically what you're doing is you're taking a snapshot of your design at that particular moment. So even if you don't code, taking a snapshot of, oh, I uploaded this image last, can save you in the event that maybe you accidentally delete some assets. You can actually go back and look at that commit and find that image and say, oh, okay, here's this image. I don't have to start from scratch. So that's another reason version control is really, really awesome, specifically when dealing with commits. So I like to think of every commit as sort of a documented design change, and it's something that GitHub makes really accessible to you. You can look like over an entire history of design, and you can look at every documented design decision, which I think is incredibly important if you're working on a really big team. I know when you're on a smaller focus team, you tend to be like, oh, well, like no one's going to need to know this later, so it's okay if I just push forward. But what GitHub allows you to do is it allows you to create sort of a design history, both for people who join your company later. They can look back at, sort of, okay, like this is the history of this specific feature. And like I said, GitHub gives you a great way to interface with that history. Yes, interface. So what a commit looks like when you push it up to GitHub, and if you're not on GitHub right now and you haven't really played around with it at all, basically what you have is a project page, and on that project page you'll see a bunch of different options, and one of them is to look at recent commits. And so this is a commit that I pushed up to a site recently. And here's my commit message, which is display disabled link for past talks. And then you have this little number on the right side. And what that number is magic. That number is actually what we call a SHA. And what it does is that snapshot that you took of your design or your app in that specific moment is documented at that SHA. And so you can see a lot of really interesting things with commit data in general. But I want to talk about a little about what we can actually do with commits. One really, really awesome thing that not a lot of people know about, GitHub lore is there's this really awesome feature called image diffing. And when I found this, I completely fell in love with it because it saves me from myself, almost every other week. So image diffing is really cool. And this is what the interface looks like for that. And you can actually just find it at that SHA. So when you push up that commit, if I were to click on that commit and I had swapped out an image, you can actually see the difference in the images. And so this is one of the views. You can see the views at the bottom. There's 2up, swipe, onion, skin, and difference, and I will show you all of them. So here, I think what was going on with these images specifically is we pushed a Retina update. So we said, okay, we need this image to actually be 2x or 4x, and so that we can serve it up for Retina displays. And so this is really cool because I can look back and in code, you really only see an image link. You see facebook.png, and you're like, okay, well that's cool, but what did I change in facebook.png? And using the image diffing is really awesome because you can go back and say, oh, one look at this, and I knew that we had created it for Retina. Another view is this. This comes more in handy when you're doing very small variations. So you can say, okay, I changed this by 2 pixels, or I changed the color, by a few hexes, and you can go back and really, really dissect. And you can also go and download that old image and actually store that. And so that's really helpful if you accidentally wipe an image or delete it. It actually saves you quite a lot. Onion skin is also really cool. It's sort of like an opaque overlay. It's really awesome when it's more detailed. This logo probably isn't the best example because they're both so similar, or they're both so different in size but similar in visual stuff. So when you're making smaller, more incremental changes, this has actually become super, super useful. And one more view is the difference view. So where are we committing to? Where are we sending these commits? It's really not clear, right? We know that, if we have a project and we send commits to that project, we know that they're going to be somewhere on GitHub, but we don't know exactly where do we want to work? Where do we want to do the majority of our work? So I kind of cheated a little bit and let you guys see that one early. But the answer is feature branches. So this more has to do with sort of our workflow here at GitHub, but also I think a lot of companies are starting to replicate sort of the way that we work. So I want to explain to you what feature branches are and how to use them in your everyday workflow, but also how to think of them from a design standpoint. So the master branch. So every project has a master branch. This is sort of, if you were to, what we call it is cloning down a project or, downloading a project to, your local machine, what you would find is this is the master branch, your main branch of the project. So master is always clean, which means it never has things that aren't ready to deploy. Everything in the master branch should be ready. We should be able to deploy it at any moment, and nothing should break. Everything should be fine, and everything should really be the way that we want it to look. So the way that we implement new features and we start new discussions around possible directions for our product is we start a feature branch. So branching is really typical actually in any version control. So that goes with SVN and I think also Mercurial. But we use Git obviously. So branches are a really big deal. It's where we do all of our feature work. And And it's really easy. So this is my favorite command because it's a really big shortcut. But if you're using the terminal and you want to create a new feature branch, so this is like not from a designer standpoint of view, this is probably not the greatest name. So this is the command, and it says git checkout -b. So that what we're doing with git checkout b is we're checking out a new branch, and then we want to name our branch. So this one has to do specifically with issues, like someone filed an issue on GitHub and said, oh, something's broken. So I'm going to go and create a branch to fix that broken thing. But you can do this with design features too. Like I do this whenever I want to do like UI tweaks or I want to fix something visual. I name the branch after, what I'm trying to do. And so that way when people know, when people look at a list of branches, they know what I'm working on, or I can point to a specific branch to start a discussion. And you can find a lot of shortcuts like this at just gitsem.org, which is an open source site that we worked on. That really is super searchable, so you can just look up a command. You don't have to know, like Git, you never stop learning Git. Like you're never done. If you're planning on using it in the terminal like I do, like be okay with that and be okay with asking questions. There isn't probably a month that goes by where I'm not like, tweeting about like, hey, is there a way to do this? And it's funny because, people assume there isn't, and so they don't ask. And you can kind of go years without realizing that there's an easier way to do the thing that you want to do. So you can have as many feature branches as you want. I have no idea, I couldn't count to tell you how many different feature branches we have right now just on github.com alone, but on our other apps as well. It's sort of, a feature branch is a way to work on something in an isolated way without breaking master, but also working with other people instead of just doing it locally. Because ideally, you could work on everything in master locally and then just push it up when you're completely done with it. But if you want to work with someone else and you want them to see the code that you're writing or see the assets that you're creating, you probably want to create a branch and push up those changes so other people can pull them down. So the way that we get our feature branches back into master is we merge them back into master. And before we do that, we actually have to merge master into our feature branch to make sure that we pull all the updates, that may have been pushed into master since we created our branch. That's kind of the tricky part, is when you create a feature branch, because you're isolated, your branch can kind of get out of date, especially if people are pushing new changes into master. And so one great way is just to bring them to constantly be merging master into your branch. It's not going to disrupt your changes at all, unless someone is working on the exact same thing, which in the case of working on a really big app is probably really rare, especially if you're communicating with your team and telling them, oh, I'm working on this thing. I doubt anyone else is going to create the same exact branch. So we want to get our feature branch into master. Let's say we're done designing our feature. We want to say, okay, it's time to push this to the people. So here's what we want to do. We want to create a pull request, and then we're going to we want to delete this branch. We don't want dead branches just sitting around when they're not really creating any use. So we're going to eventually delete that, but we're going to create a pull request. And a pull request is something that was invented on GitHub by my very awesome coworkers, and I like to say pull request is, universal for progress. So we want to pull request our feature branch into our master branch. So we have a bunch of commits, and we want to. So like I was explaining before, obviously you're going to commit more than once to this feature branch, especially if you're constantly pushing it up and other people are pulling it down. You guys are both going to be shoving commits into this branch, and so eventually you're going to want to merge all of those commits into the master branch. Okay, so here's, again, the universal sign for progress is a pull request. And if you haven't figured this out, these are the octagons that we use on our website, but they're all kind of about our visual language and how we kind of have visualized Git and version control in general. And so the little nodes on these things represent commits, and obviously the long elongated part is the branch. And so we're going to create a pull request. So I'm going to say, I've added all of these commits, and I want to add them and I want to discuss them with somebody. I want to create a discussion around pulling all of these into master because I want to ship this to people, to GenPop. And so discussions, this is where your discussion takes part. This is where you start bringing in other people who maybe haven't been working on these features with you, but people who are responsible for the app you're working on, or who are, who have more of input on the vision of a product. Maybe this is your director of design, your creative director. You want to discuss changes with them. So in a pull request, it's sort of just a comment thread. It links the code, and yeah, the code's great because what you can do is kind of get down into the code and you can say, okay, like, you can code review things. You can say, oh, this CSS structure is wrong, or, this image should be something else. Like here, what I did was I added a screenshot, and I said, okay, like, what do you think of this? And I really wanted to get my coworkers' input before we merge it into master. And so this is a place to have those discussions alongside your code. Markdown's really awesome. So for those of you who don't know what Markdown is, it's basically, yeah, the opposite of markup. It's sort of like a syntax that we use for just writing comments and stuff, and it's native in GitHub, so we use it everywhere. And you can actually create files, plain text. It's basically plain text, but with a little bit of flavor. And the file extension is .md, so you've probably run into this at some point, but Markdown's pretty awesome when you want to shortcut writing like some kind of comment or thread, and it actually works in a lot of places. So this is what Markdown looks like. So back in the dark ages when GitHub didn't have drag and drop, images, which is how designers basically, like, that's how I get through my day is I share screenshots. And developers get excited when they see screenshots because they're like, oh, like, now I'm excited to work on this thing because, look, Julie's pushing all these commits and creating these awesome designs. Like, I think I really want to work on this. So this is how we keep each other motivated. And this is how we write it in Markdown. So this is basic Markdown syntax for, adding a screenshot. But we can now drag and drop. So it's really, really simple for, designers who don't want to learn drop or Markdown. You can basically just like drag and drop any image and then discuss it with your coworkers. It's pretty awesome. Another great thing about Markdown is emoji. So emoji is native on GitHub and most of our other apps, which means that you can basically like type in any emoji that you use like on your international keyboard on your iPhone. And for me, this makes my job so much more playful and awesome. Instead of, it's such a great way to like show your enthusiasm or show love towards your coworkers. Someone once at one of our all hands got up and gave a talk about how he had never seen more red hearts exchanged between men as he had at GitHub and pull requests, because it's such a great way to like show your enthusiasm and love for your coworkers, and people get excited when you see it, and also like makes you a much nicer and playful person, which is really great when you're doing something as serious as like writing code for 8 hours or whatever. It just totally changes your day. And I probably don't have to sell emoji to you guys, but this is another great thing that's native on GitHub. And for designers, it's a visual language, so it's really exciting. So not only do code reviews and like sort of discussions happen on GitHub, but that's where we do our design reviews. It's where we discuss like the direction of our product and where it's going to go. And like I said, it creates a history for you. And it's great for new people who come in who have questions and say, hey, like this is weird, or like why is the UX for this way? There might be like some data behind that they don't really know, and they'll have to talk to several people to kind of grasp that. But if it's on GitHub and they can just look at the repo, look at past pull requests, dig through, and it's all very searchable and discoverable, they can find that discussion and say, oh, like we didn't change this because of X, Y, and Z. Or I need to talk to, Kyle about this, or I need to talk to Ben about this because I think it would be an interesting discussion. So our design reviews happen on GitHub all the time. And not only are designers and sort of like, design directors, they're not the only ones involved in this. Developers are too. And so we get a lot of, opinions from people who are using our software. And I guess we're kind of lucky in that way where, we're building stuff for ourselves in a way because we're all developers, we're all designers. And so we're lucky in that we have the insight of the people that are using our products right here in-house. So another feature of pull requests is that really helps with design reviews in particular is we have app mentioning, and we can create teams. So teams are really awesome because they allow you to kind of ping someone on something that you're not sure about. So we definitely have a disproportionate amount of developers to designers, but I think that's not a bad problem to have, especially when you build tools around communicating better with, your team. So we have, this group that we've created called GitHub Design, and it's not just designers, it's people who are interested in design and interested in that discussion. And so if a developer's, coded something, or they've created new features that they're excited about, but they want to hear what like our designers have to say about it, they'll just ping us on this, and they'll say, oh, at GitHub/design, what do you guys think? Or I could use it's also like a bat signal. It's also like, hey, I need some design help on this. And that's great because you don't end up having to police people on design, which is, if anyone's ever worked at a company with, a growing brand and something where you've had to go around and say, you should be using this logo and not this one, I've definitely been there, and it can be incredibly frustrating, but this is a proactive way to handle that issue. People sort of, not necessarily like a sign-off or anything, but it's a way to start a discussion with people who are like-minded. So GitHub in a lot of ways is just a great way to future-proof your business and also future-proof your designs. It's great to create the design history and share it with your new coworkers, but also to be able to create discussions constantly and to be talking about things and getting feedback and giving feedback. And I feel like it's such a great way to improve every aspect of what you do. I think it's particularly interesting that I look at things that maybe I couldn't do a year ago, and now I look at sort of how technical I am now, and I think it's just a matter of immersion. I get to see all of these discussions happen on GitHub, and I get to learn about things like ops. I get to learn about things like systems, and even though I can only understand them from a high level, it's still interesting for me to be exposed to them. And making your business more open is just a great thing in general. Everyone learns. Everyone kind of moves forward. And so with that, that's sort of my first part of the talk. I want to go into a live demo and show you guys some sort of my process. I'm going to do it with a really simple, app I'm working on, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of, what do I do every day? What does pushing a change up to GitHub look like? Okay, so, oops. Probably don't want to see that. So I, along with being a designer and a developer here at GitHub, I host an all-female talk series called Passion Projects, and it's actually my passion project. So it's something that I came up with on my own and really wanted to push, and GitHub's just supported me all the way. And so I have a website for this. And it's under, the Passion Project user. And I recently just enlisted the help of one of my coworkers who's learning to code right now. She actually doesn't do anything technical here at GitHub, but she wants to learn how to code. And so I thought, the way that I learned to code was actually just doing really, really minor things, like replacing anchor links, breaking them, and then trying to figure out what I did wrong. So one thing that branches work really well for is you can go and break as many things as you want, and it's not going to affect your master branch. It's not going to affect the project, where it's living, what it's doing. And so I'm really excited to kind of intro her into this. And so I'm going to use this app to show you guys. I'm going to start a pull request with Amber, and then I'm going to show you guys sort of what that would look like from my end. So this is github.com. If you've never seen GitHub yet, if you haven't seen GitHub yet, this is sort of what the general interface looks like, and this is what a repo or a projects page would look like. So again, I'm going to go back to my mass weapons of creation. Here's my text editor, and here's just my static HTML page for my site. I'll show you guys what the site looks like right now. And this is the URL, and it's just a really normal project page built with GitHub pages. So it's all static, but it's all just a bunch of text, some images, and some links. But it'll get you a long way, trust me. Then I have the file locally right here. And then I have the project page. So I'm actually going to go back to my editor, and I'm going to make a change. So let's see what I want to do. So I'm going to have new speakers soon. So I want to actually change these speakers around and edit them a little bit. So let's see. Let's delete this guy. And let's just add another. I think I floated this one on the left, so I want to use that one. And so I'm going to have to replace all these links and also sort of maybe the bio to, get this started. So what this looks like right now, so this is my page locally. I'm just looking at the changes I've made. So right now, Timony is on the left and Sarah's on the right. And so what I wanted to do is maybe bring up one of my other speakers to this section, start writing her bio, do that kind of stuff. And maybe I want to leave the, replacing the links for Amber because she's learning how to code. And, it's a great way for us to work together on a really simple app. So I want to refresh. And now we have Sarah on the left and the right. So let's start bringing in, the assets from, Leslie. Let's add Leslie. She's the next speaker. So what I've done in my CSS is I've basically given a class of the person's last name or first name, and that class basically represents the background image of their avatar. So now that should change to Leslie. Great. And I want to go. So this is really basic code. You guys probably all know how to do this, but it's really simple. And this is basically how I learned to code, so it's pretty awesome. So I have basic stuff up now. I have a general direction. I want to push this up to GitHub and create a pull request into master, and I want to ask Amber to come and contribute to it. So now that I've made changes, I need to find where I am in my project. So this is my home directory, and I keep this project right in my home directory. So I want to change my directory to this project. Okay, well, maybe not. So when you do ls, you can actually see all of your projects in your the directory that the current directory that you're in. So I see it. So now I just want to say cd. I've probably misspelled things. That happens. There you go. So I'm going to run a git status. I'm going to say, okay, like what have I changed? So I changed the sash cache. Sash is just a tool for writing CSS, but I changed my index HTML file. I'm going to go ahead and add that. So I've added, using the doc, it says like I want to add all of the files above, and so I did that. Let's write a commit message. I'm going to say get page ready for Amber, or like to change like display links or something. And commit messages can be as big as you want them or as granular as you want them. Because this is such a simple app and there's really only me and Amber working on it, I don't know that it's as important to be as specific. Whereas if you're working on a really big app and you're making incremental changes, you probably want to note that incremental change more specifically. I think there's like a great quote that's like, always use specificity over brevity, and that's specifically like really important if you're working with a lot of people. It's always cute to like write class names that are like, oh, fun time, hearts, whatever. But what does that mean to other people? I think it's really important to write code as if someone else is going to read it. So now I've committed this. And so I want to push it up to GitHub. But I first want to create a branch because I don't want to push this in a master because it's not ready to go live yet. So I want to use my shortcut, which I love so much, site update, maybe. So that's what I'm naming it. Git push organ. And then I want to push this up to GitHub so I can create that branch on GitHub and I can take this commit with it. So I need a site update. And now it's just pushing it up. So I created my new branch at site updates. So I'm going to go back to GitHub and I'm going to see if I can see my branch now. There it is. Okay, cool. So now I have a branch. So I'm going to start a pull request and bring Amber into the conversation. And this is what a pull request looks like. It's really basic. But I want to, maybe I'll just screenshot this and I'll say, okay, like, Amber, like I'm ready to work on this. Are you? Here's what this looks like. It should keep looking like this. That's another thing. If you have people who aren't as used to working on projects, and you want them to see what normal is, so that if they make any mistakes, they can go back and fix it, or they have kind of like a point of reference. And doing that in pull requests actually really helps too, even to keep your own sanity, right? Like it's a great sanity check. Okay, so I started my pull request. I'll select my images. Here's my screenshots. Cool. So now it's uploaded. I can preview this. That's not. Oh, there you go. Cool. So I've started this pull request. Maybe tell Amber. She's not in my org, so I can't mention her yet. So let's update these links to Leslie's. Great. So I'm going to send this pull request. I probably want to mention something that's like, oh, this is a work in progress. Don't merge to master yet. When you're working with a lot of people, I think doing this is really, really important because it's saying, hey, this isn't done yet. It also prevents sort of like the rabbit hole of conversation that usually starts with like, well, why does this specific link, why is this color, when you might not even be focusing on that. You're just trying to get a general discussion started. So I like to preface most of my pull requests with like, hey, this is a work in progress. And I usually mention, the people that I want to get started on that conversation. And usually the only people who will see this is if they're subscribed to the repository or project page, or if I've mentioned them in the thread. And it's a great way to focus the conversation and keep it from, going a million different directions, especially if you're working at a big company. You have hundreds of people working on an app, and they're also invested and they care so much that I think sometimes that can get in the way and it can slow us down a little and prevent us from moving forward if we focus on the wrong bits. And so when you're doing this specifically within a design team or with a really small group of people, it's a great way to focus on something and get it shipped without going down that rabbit hole. So I'm usually not so enthusiastic, but let's add some emoji. This is my emoji spirit animal, so I'm going to throw that in. Okay, cool. So I've started a pull request. And this is what it looks like. Here's my commit. I can go to my commit and see, oh, the red is what used to be, and this is what I've added. So we've changed these. I changed this link to the class left. I can float it left, and I changed the rest to duplicate Sarah's and get rid of Kimini since she'll be speaking this week. So now we have this, and it's pretty awesome. So now when I'm ready to merge this into master, what I'll do is I'll merge pull requests, and it's really great. So basically what will happen is Amber will come in, and she'll add her comments, and she'll focus on all this stuff. I'll go review her code over here and say, oh, like this is great. The links read as are, and it's great to ship, and then we'll merge the pull request. And because we're using GitHub Pages, which is a static site generator, you don't really need to like go to Heroku and do anything or deploy anything. It's not on a server. It's just running on our servers. And so I can just merge the pull request, and that automatically updates the page. Another really awesome thing is you can actually comment on specific lines of code. So if I went here and I was like, oh, like, why is this class left? Shouldn't we float this element right or something? And so when you're a designer and you're learning to code, I think it's really common for you to get in over your head sometimes, especially if you're working on a really large-scale web application. So this happens like a ton of times. People are really used to building static sites like the one I'm building right now, and they've never really worked with a ton of other people in writing a lot of CSS, like tons of files, and it all kind of works with each other. And so when you're doing code reviews specifically are important for designers because maybe a more experienced front-end person can come in and comment on not only like how your code looks, but how it interacts with the rest of the code. Like how does this fit into our CSS structure, our CSS strategy, or something along those lines. Great. So, I mean, I have a pull request. This is pretty great. I could merge it in Terminal if I wanted to. This is a really great way to start a conversation specifically with, my coworkers or who I'm working with. So that pretty much covers, my demo for today and my talk. And so I think we're going to take some questions, I believe, as soon as I can get back to this guy. So what tool did I use for screenshots? So I use Cloud App. It's fantastic. I love it. I know the person who started it. It's designed really well. It's actually really awesome. I would show you the page, but I'm afraid of all the GIFs that might pop up. But yeah, Cloud App is great. I would totally recommend using it. It's fantastic. It has a great interface, and it goes really fast and makes that really cute ding noise. I don't. So the next question is, do you have any tools for mass migration from Visual Source Safe? I've never heard of Visual Source Safe. I'm guessing that maybe it's the Photoshop thing that you basically, it's like version control for Photoshop. I don't use Photoshop a whole lot, so I don't, I'm sorry, but I will definitely ask around and see if I can find something. Where are Git projects hosted? Can a project be hosted on a local machine? Yeah. So basically, until you push something up to GitHub, it is hosted on your local machine. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but we host them on our servers, on our file servers, but they also, I actually do know what this means. So we actually have a product specifically for this, and it's called GitHub Enterprise. So you can run Git or GitHub also on your own server, so we never even see your code, which is really great. We've created our own package manager, so we basically bundle up GitHub.com and we let you run it on your own server, so that if it's a security concern, you don't really have to go back and forth. You can kind of just use GitHub Enterprise, and it's great. And you can check that out at enterprise.github.com. So early stage design is interesting. I have a question that says, if your team doesn't do whiteboarding, how does your team do early stage design? Prototyping is great for more fleshed out ideas, but it's hard to rapidly explore initial design concepts that way. We cheat a lot, actually. So I think a great way to do it is we basically take screenshots of the site of how it is. And I know a lot of people who go into Photoshop and they're basically like put screenshots on top of other screenshots. That's really early. I really like whiteboarding, but I can do it kind of alone, and I do like the really nerdy thing where I take like photographs of my whiteboards and send it to whoever I'm working on it with. We also do a lot of like mini summits, which is when all the people from one team will come to SF or go to some kind of location, and they'll talk face to face about specific design problems. We'll do sketches together. Everyone from what I know of at GitHub, all of our designers sketch. Like we all like write on paper. We all sketch and do crazy things, and we're not. It's kind of a hurdle, like being comfortable sharing those with everybody, because like for me personally, I'm a terrible sketch artist. It's like kind of looks like chicken scratch, and maybe my 6-year-old niece is better than me at drawing, sort of thing. But it's sort of, you have to be comfortable and trust the people you're around and know that like you're just trying to communicate one simple idea. And if you can do that through just sketching and like taking a screenshot and then maybe even doing like a Skype thing, that's sort of how we explore early stage design. So how do people who aren't designers view your PSD files and other specialized files? Do you always save a current JPEG with the same file name? So we don't really, all of our designers code, and so we don't do any handoff between PSD files. If we share anything visual, it's in pull request, and we do a screenshot of the entire page. There is a lot of trust there, because no one's digging into like our layers or whatever. But that's how we kind of manage that. Although a lot of our developers have Photoshop because they all are interested in design. We promote like the whole idea of continued learning, basically. Like everyone here is multidisciplinary, and we try to hire people that are good at a lot of things and great at one thing. And so everyone is learning different things. Like some of our developers are better Octocat illustrators than I am. So I think we kind of we're lucky that way, I guess. So the next question is, how do you find at GitHub/design? So these teams are only within an organization. And so that's what makes it so valuable for me or for us is that we can create any number of teams. So even if we wanted to get more granular with that and say, GitHub/UI, like people who are specifically interested in UI, it's actually only within our organization. So open source organizations you can probably mention on other things, but this is purely internally. So you could create these with your teams. Can you edit? So the next question is, can you edit Markdown directly on GitHub? Yep. So I'm running out of time. I would love to actually demo that also. But there's a GUI on GitHub. You can actually edit any code on GitHub, which is really amazing because you can just, if you have access to a browser, you can make changes. Like last night I realized that I had not swapped out a few of my links, and I was at like a baseball game and someone had brought their MacBook Air, and I basically just opened their Air, logged into GitHub, and there's an edit file page when you're viewing a file on like from your regular like project page. You can view the file and then you can hit edit, and you can just make changes in anything, HTML, Markdown, CSS, any of those things. It's pretty awesome. Next question is, can you or anyone recommend a good source for learning Git? Let's see. GitSEM.org is amazing. I definitely went to a few workshops. We have our training. We have a training team here, and they do a ton of workshops for companies. And I wonder if there's a really great cheat sheet or something. There probably is. I would just Google it. There's a ton of cheat sheets out there for Git, but Git SEM is really awesome because you can search anything. So you can search branching, and it'll tell you exactly the command you need to know. That's what I use almost every day to look something up. Or ask on Twitter. Please ask on Twitter. Nerds are always willing to prove themselves. Trust me. The next question is, will GitHub support image diffing for PSD and AI files? I don't think so. I'm not fully positive, but I don't think so. Not yet. I don't think so. Yeah, sorry. The next question is, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. I'm going to skip to the next one. What kind of tools are recommended for merging graphical content? I know that there's a couple PSD or Photoshop things like this, kind of version control apps. I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but I would definitely Google it. There's a handful of them that actually do it really well. I know some of my other coworkers use Photoshop a lot, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I know there are tools out there. So the last question I'm going to take is, what is your design tool of choice? CSS. I love CSS. CSS, you can do so much with it now, especially visual effects that you couldn't do before CSS3. A lot of things that you would normally create in Photoshop, drop shadows, box shadows, highlights, all of those things like lighting effects, you can do it all in CSS now, which is really useful because when you're testing things in browser, you can actually see how they will actually render in the browser instead of the effects that we create in Photoshop that kind of seem insane. They're probably only reproducible in Flash apps. But a really great thing is if you do it in CSS, you're looking at what it's going to look like to your users, which is really useful, especially with things like color, drop shadows, transitions, any of that stuff. So definitely CSS in the browser. And then I think that's going to wrap up my questions.